Well, it's good to be back with you. My family and I just had what was really a remarkable couple of weeks with family and friends in Sweden. And as we traveled around the country, one of the things we saw the most of was churches. For some reason, wherever we went, people thought we wanted to see churches. I can't imagine. It was really good, and it was a lot of fun, and we got to see some of the most beautiful sanctuaries of worship that you can possibly imagine. There's one that I want to share with you this morning because I think it speaks to not just my trip, but to a larger experience of faith in general. I want to show you this church. It's toward the south of Sweden. This church was built in around the year 1250. Let that sink in for just a minute. It's been around for over 760 years. The building on your left is the original sanctuary. The building on your right is the original bell tower. I've been in historical structures that have been around since that same time period. What separates this one from all the other structures of that same period that I've been in is that this one continues to be used as a church. It has been in continual service of ministry since it was built in the mid-13th century. That is phenomenal. I mean, that is just to sit and to be in the midst of those walls, those floors. I mean, if they could speak and tell us the story of the gospel that had been testified to in that place, it would just be unbelievable. Let me show you just a couple pictures. This is facing the front so that you can see the altar area and the cross up front. This is toward the back. Those paintings are of all the apostles. They begin with Paul, which I thought you would think was interesting. This is the original baptismal font, built in the mid-1200s, still in use today. This is one of the original paintings on the wall of the church that they've been able to maintain and do some restoration on. It was so cool to be there, and I couldn't help but wonder of all the lives and all the people who've been touched by the hundreds of years of gospel proclamation in this little church in the rural countryside of Sweden. There was a box outside the sanctuary. It was falling apart. It was on a pillar, and I couldn't read what was above it. And I asked what it was, and he said, "Oh, that's an alms box." And that box had hung outside of that church for generations. And people would come and they would just put things in it for the poor. And those who had need would just come and open the box and take out what they needed to get, be it money or something else that they would place in that box. And they were not only just speaking and testifying the gospel of Jesus Christ, but they were preaching it in their deeds as well. It was so powerful. And as I stood there, I thought about our own church. I mean, I know that we haven't been around since the 13th century. We're a lot younger than that church. But you know, we're a part of the same story. Sometimes I think it's easy for us as Christians to forget that our story is a global one. And our story is one that stretches back almost 2,000 years. And hundreds and thousands of churches throughout the world and millions of people have been part of the same story that you and I are part of today. And it's a story that's going to continue long after we're gone. It's a beautiful story. And as beautiful as that building is, what makes the story so beautiful is it's not just about the space, it's about the people. Somehow we're connected to them. And I think that's really powerful, and I think it's really special. My prayer for us as a church is that as we write our chapter, it's going to be as significant as any other chapter that's ever been written. And I'm so glad to be part of writing that chapter with you. I want to tell you about another chapter of my family's history, and that relates to this church. Some of you have heard this story before. This church is found not too far away from the one I just showed you in the Swedish village of Bollebygd. And this is my great-grandfather's church. The first time my great-grandfather entered this church, he did so with his two siblings and his parents. My great-grandfather and his family, they were tenant farmers, basically living in a shack and working on the land of a rich property owner. And when they came to church in this sanctuary, they did what they had always been taught in prior churches and what was the culture in the country at the time. And that was you sat according to your position. So those who had positions of power, those who had wealth, those who had prestige, they sat towards the front of the church. Those who were poor, those who didn't have power, who didn't have prestige, who didn't have position, they sat toward the back of the church. So my great-grandfather's family, when they entered into the church, they sat in the back of the sanctuary. And they did so for at least that first week, but what they didn't know was at the time there was a young vicar who was working there. His name was Josef Sandstrom. And he was pressing back against this long-held tradition of this priority seating for those with preference and for those with privilege and for those with wealth. And he was teaching a completely new message, and that message was that all are equal in the eyes of God, and in God's house there is no assigned seating. I'm sure that a part of the argument that he made came from the book of James, where we find these words. For if a person with gold rings and in fine clothes comes into your assembly, and if a poor person in dirty clothes also comes in, and if you take notice of the one wearing the fine clothes and say, have a seat here, please, while to the one who is poor you say, stand there, or sit at my feet. Have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? This teaching of equality deeply touched my great-grandfather and his family. What we do know about my great-grandfather's story is while he was at this church, he was confirmed by this vicar, and he also experienced a call to ministry. And that call to ministry was rooted in the seed that was planted by that church, saying to him, you matter. You are just as special in the eyes of God as anyone else is special in the eyes of God. And God loves us all because we are all God's children. One of the reasons we took this trip this summer was to go and just worship in that church. Just to be there in that space. I've been there once before, but not for long enough. We wanted to go back and just worship. But about a week before we left, I got an email from the current vicar who said, you'll be preaching, right? And here's the passage on which we want you to preach. And it was a passage that was set on the schedule generations ago. It was for John the Baptist Sunday, and it was part of the liturgical calendar. They did not choose this passage for the day, but I think God's hand and the Spirit was involved. The story of the day was about the birth of John the Baptist. And if you're familiar with the story, you know it's one of great mystery. All kinds of stuff was happening around that birth. It was hard to explain and hard to understand. His dad couldn't talk, and then he couldn't talk. They're naming him John, which wasn't a family name. There was all this stuff that was going on. And everybody who was witnessing all of this, they were so overwhelmed by the events that they couldn't help but ask, what then will this child become? If all of this is going on around his birth, surely the hand of God is upon him. What then is going to become of this child? And as I read that question, I couldn't help but think about the circumstances that led my family and so many other families to immigrate from Sweden to the United States. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, 10% of that country's population left the country because there were some significant hardships that they couldn't overcome. And it wasn't easy for them to leave. They left with hopes, and they left with a promise of a new place, the promise of a better life, but there are no guarantees. They were frightened and they were afraid, but they went because they really had no other choice. And when they left, don't you know that the family and friends that they left behind wondered, what then will these children become? What then will these, our friends and our family, become? It wasn't like Facebook. They didn't go over there and post, we've made it. They didn't know. A lot of them had no idea whatever happened to their family once they got on that boat, and some people still don't know. We just discovered our family and our roots and our story 5 years ago. So when I got that text, all I could think about was going back and answering this question that I'm sure in some way someone asked about my great-grandfather. I can't tell the story of the other almost million immigrants, but I can of him. And this is what happened. He arrived in the States at about the age of 14. He got his education and went to seminary and became a pastor. He lived into the call that he had received in that church. And he began serving Swedish churches in immigrant communities. And at the heart of his message was the same message that he had been taught in that little rural church in the south of Sweden. that in the eyes of God, everyone is equal, no exceptions. And in the 1920s, my great-grandfather was preaching that, not only about money, not only about position and power. He was teaching equality about race and gender and all of those things. Don't you know how dangerous that was in the 1920s? To be preaching the message of equality in the way that he was? So here I am, all these years later, back in that church, preaching from the same pulpit where he heard the vicar of that day talk about a message that planted a seed in his life that helped him enter into a ministry and continue preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ that is there for all people. And in the sanctuary that day are his 2 great-grandchildren, one of whom played his ukulele that morning in the worship service, and the other who identifies as African American, worshiping in that church. It was this really powerful full circle moment where we were able to answer the question of what became of one of the church's children in a way that's almost so good you can't write it that way. As I thought about that story of my great-grandfather and the power of church and what it can do to a young person's life, I couldn't help but think of another story, one much closer to home. And this is just one of the many stories that we could tell about the young people in our church. But this one is about a young woman named Beth Hoagland. And Beth Hoagland had an experience here a few years ago that really shaped her life because of the seeds that were planted in this place by the way that you responded to her when she came with an idea and with a need. Rather than tell you the story myself, I sat down with Beth and asked her to tell it. And so let's listen to what she has to say.
So I'm Beth Hoagland. I was a former youth group member, and now I'm part of the millennials group in church. And when I was a junior in high school, I knew that I had a senior project coming up, which was just a community outreach project that our school encouraged us to do to give back to the community. And so at the time I was really interested in environmental science, and I knew I wanted to do something related to environmental science. And during youth group one time, Jerry mentioned this group he did photography for Edge Outreach, now known as Water Steps. And he connected me with them, and I really enjoyed what their mission was, which is to do water purification systems throughout the world, because water issues are a really big problem. There's 800 million people who don't have adequate access to clean water supplies. And so I got connected with Edge. I went there and learned how to actually operate a water purification system, which was really awesome that they teach a lot of people. It's really simple to use and it's really easy to deploy. It's cheap. And so I actually learned how to operate the system and thought it was just a really great project to teach the rest of the community about. And so my friend and I at the time set up this project and went to different schools, churches, and particularly our church to tell people about this awesome invention. So we first did a small presentation to the board here, telling them about Edge. Jerry was there as well, and just to give them a little bit of background and what our goals were. And then they gave us the go-ahead, and we did a evening presentation at church where we did a little PowerPoint presentation and had different booths set up with facts about the more general global water crisis and about Edge Outreach specifically. And our goal was to raise money to actually purchase a water purification system that we could deploy to a community in need. And right before we did this presentation, the Haiti earthquake happened. Before Edge Outreach went over and other groups like that, they were just sending over plastic water bottles, which was really unsustainable and not enough quantity of water to supply this community for a long period of time. And so we actually wanted to raise the money to fund Edge Outreach, fund a water purification system through Edge Outreach for them to deploy in Haiti, which could supply up to 10,000 people with water for a long period of time, and it's more sustainable. So we actually surpassed our goals, and the majority of that was because of the church. So during our presentation, we asked for donations. It was pretty open-ended, the donation part, but in return, we had these little water bottles that we had designed to raise money as well, so they could either buy a water bottle or make a donation to the cause in general. But it wasn't only a financial contribution, it was just the support from the church to take the time to sit down and listen to what us high schoolers had to say. I mean, I was just a little high schooler at the time, and I didn't know everything, and yet the church still took the time to listen and give back as well and support us. So the support for the project not only helped us raise the money for the purification system, but it really helped me personally realize that there was this tangible way I could give back to the community and to the world in general. And so it's kind of crazy for me to look back now at that point in my life and realize how pivotal of a moment that was, because now I'm a PhD student at Penn State studying hydrology and focusing specifically on water quality issues. And a lot of that is because of the church, and because I realized that there is this way to affect the world from an environmental standpoint and also help solve this global water crisis. And so not only did I find this issue, but I found this passion and this love I have for science and for giving back that I realized at this point in my life. And so this really set me down the path I am now, that I'm on now. So I can't thank the church enough for supporting me in this way, and I can't encourage you enough to continue supporting youth in this way, because it's not really a tangible thing, the fact that this has changed the personal course of my life, but it does. It makes an impact, and I think taking, not only financially, but like taking time to listen to the youth and encourage them in their goals and their outreach goals is critical.
Isn't that a great story? Yeah, I love that story. And I remember when Beth first came and she said, "Hey, we've got this idea, this is what we're working on, and we want to present it to the church. What do you think?" I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And you know why we said, "Yeah, let's do it"? Because when a young person in the church comes and says, "Hey, I have an idea, we don't know what we're going to do, but we want the church to help us," you don't say, "Well, I need to check with this committee first." You say, "Absolutely. What can we do to help? How can we walk alongside you in the midst of this? What does that look like for you?" And so we didn't know what we were doing. We just made it up as we went along, and it was great. And Beth and her peer did a great job, and this church did what this church does so well. And you wrapped yourselves around them, and not just with your presence, and you're taking them seriously, and you're asking them their questions, but you raised money for them beyond what they wanted to raise, and they were able to fund that water system to go down to Haiti. I mean, these seeds that were being planted in Beth's life at that point, no one at that point knew what would become of Beth. We knew she was going to do good things, but we didn't know what exactly that would look like. And now she's studying hydrology so that she can help solve the world's clean water issues. You know, we talk about being a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world, that every one of us is called to find our gifts and our passions and to look at where the world is broken and to take our passions into that and make a difference. That's the seed we've been planting, and there's some of the fruit. It's so great to celebrate a story like this. But hers is just one of many stories. This is a picture of our youth group. We've talked about them a little bit today. Not only are they great dancers, they're great workers. This is them getting ready to get on the bus for their mission trip last week. They look a little more tired this morning. No, not at all. They just spent a whole week making a difference in Cedar Grove, West Virginia, doing the Lord's work through repairing homes and forming relationships. And you know, this mission trip is no small deal. It costs a lot in terms of monetary investment. It costs a lot in terms of investment of time, of energy, of what's going on, of the things that we're doing as a church. But it's so important that we do this because this plants seeds. it's seeds that we may not know how they're going to come to grow in the future, but they're going to grow. That I assure you. You look at that, and you look at what Alan and that group worked together with those kids coming from all over the nation to make a difference in Louisville. You look at our children's and our youth ministries here at First Christian, outside of those things, that are working every Sunday morning and on Sunday nights and through the various ministries that they do. They're planting seeds and they're making a difference because we know that this is the call of the church. This story of Beth is just as powerful as the story of my great-grandfather, and there are other stories in this church that are equally powerful. As a church, one of the greatest responsibilities we have is to plant seeds of faith in those who are younger than we are so that they can grow into the people that God is calling them to be. My prayer for us as a church is that we will take that call seriously and we will always have it at the forefront of our minds. And even if we can't always answer the question, well then what then is going to become of them? We can trust that the answer to that question is in God's hands. And we do our part and then we send them forth. And we look forward to the results, even if we may not fully know them ourselves. I want to take a moment and just let us pray for our kids, for our young people, for our church, so that we can continue to plant these kind of seeds and turn them loose, because I'm telling you, they're doing great stuff. But all the great stuff that they're doing is being supported by great people like you. And it really matters. Let's pray. God, I'm so grateful to be part of a community that calls itself the body of Christ. That for the last almost 2,000 years has been trusting in you to take each person who answers the call of faith and to shape and mold them into something that will change this world. I pray that as a church we would continue to plant seeds of faith for everyone who walks through these doors, especially the youth and the children that we call our own. We love them so much, oh God, and we just pray that we would have the opportunity to shape their lives in as many ways as possible so that they can feel and know that love. Help us, oh God, not only to talk at them, telling them what we think is right for them, but to talk with them, hearing them, listening to them, learning from them, encouraging them. And then, oh God, help us to turn them over to you. To let you walk with them beyond these doors, to be the light of your world in whatever way they are called to make a difference in this place. Continue, O God, to bless and keep our church and all those that we call our children, that they may continue to come to you and serve the Lord.